everyone, and welcome to Strategies for Engaging and Retaining Global Talent. I'm your moderator, Beth Longman. I'm the content manager here at Multiplier, and I'm joined today by some amazing speakers who I'll introduce very shortly. But I thought it would just be good to give a little context to our discussion today first. I'm sure some of you will have heard the Korn Ferry research, which estimates that by 2030, there could be a global talent shortage of over 85 million people. This could result in about 8.5 trillion in unrealized annual revenue. It's clear that employee retention is more important than ever, but at the same time, we have this research showing that only 23% of employees across the world actually feel engaged at work. We have these teams that are increasingly distributed with diverse expectations, and it can be hard to meet these different needs. And that's where we're going to be diving in today. All of these speakers here have amazing experience resolving these challenges and supporting employees, so I'm really excited to introduce them now. I'll start with Anna Volkova. She's head of people and culture at HiBob and has a wealth of experience in HR leadership. She's currently shaping their regional strategies, supporting expansion, helping them attract top talent, and strengthening leadership and culture. Anna, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much for the warm welcome. I'm so excited to be here and in such great presence with all of the other speakers. I actually joined HiBob only 3 months ago, so very new to that business, but have been working in HR for a very, very long time. Super excited to be here and to share any insights on, I guess, engaging, retaining talent, and hopefully giving some good takeaway practical tips for the viewers.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We also have another Anna here. This is Anna Meyer. She's global head of people at Acceldata. So she's worked as a HR executive in Silicon Valley technology companies. Sorry, that was a mouthful. For more than 20 years, supporting engagement and inclusion by building performance-based cultures, optimizing compensation, and looking at talent attraction and development. Anna, do you want to introduce yourself too?
For sure. Yeah. So happy to be here. Very happy to be joining some wonderful minds and thought leaders on this topic. And yeah, I'm here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've been working with technology companies on multiple organizational issues and topics for many years, and looking forward to discussing this topic.
Perfect, thank you. Lastly, we have our very own Priyanka Jain, who has over 10 years experience in HR, more specifically in people growth and advisory and organization design. And she's been part of building a 500-person plus team here at Multiplier, ensuring seamless integration across borders. Over to you, Priyanka.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you so much for the warm welcome. I'm very excited to be part of this group and speak with Anna and Anna Meyer both to discuss on the topic around engagement and retention of talent. Thank you so much. Been a very exciting journey so far in HR, and I'm looking forward to how that grows in the changing times. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and so without further ado, we're going to jump straight into the first question. We're starting the discussion by exploring compensation and benefits, which still form the basis of strong employee engagement strategies, with many studies pointing to pay as a top driver of loyalty and retention. Just a note that throughout this session, we will have polls running, so please engage. And also, if you want to ask any questions, drop comments, you can do so in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. So I'm going to start with you, Anna Volkova. The first kind of question we're going to explore here is, how can companies ensure that global employees receive fair compensation and the right benefits?
Awesome. Good question to start with. I think this is, absolutely really topical for us and has been for many years, but I think becoming more and more topical. I think for me, ensuring that fair compensation, I guess, really starts with having a clear remuneration principle. So set of guidelines that shape how pay decisions are made across the business, looking at equity, so ensuring employees are paid fairly for their role, internal relativity, so are people being paid the same depending on, that have similar performance and similar roles, paying to market, ensuring that we're remaining competitive with external benchmarks, and of course, business affordability. So, are our pay practices financially sustainable? And I think once these principles are in place, companies really need to focus on transparency, benchmarking, and consistency. So fair pay isn't just about numbers, it's about showing employees that their contributions really are valued and recognised. And I think this really requires both internal equity and reliable market data, and a tool that really can fuse that together. At HiBob, we see businesses use platforms like ours to streamline compensation reviews, And I think what's really important is actually linking compensation to performance, to values in the business, and having those clear benchmarks, offering visibility across lots of roles and geographies as well. And I think the other thing that I'll say is adaptability is really key. So, we need to make sure that that we have the right balance between regional pay expectations and being globally consistent as well. For us, we use Mercer for our market data, but there's, which is really, really robust benchmarking. But there are other crowdsourced solutions that you can use, like Levels FYI or Glassdoor. In Australia, we have also WGEA reporting that can help as well.
Nice, thank you. That was super interesting. I'd love to hear more about the performance-based side, like how, if you haven't been managing your compensation in that way, like what does it take to go back and start to implement that kind of a structure?
Well, I think, if you are introducing something new, I think like any business, probably one of the most important things is getting alignment at the leadership level about those principles and how you're going to do that. So really looking at how you're measuring performance, getting alignment, and I think ensuring that the leadership team are on the same page from that perspective as well. So, and then having those clear structures in place to deliver.
Nice, interesting. Priyanka, would you like to jump in with maybe, because I know it's something we've been exploring at Multiplier, like the, especially with pay transparency, right, like rules coming out and everything, like what is your take on this whole issue?
Absolutely, and completely echo Anna's views in terms of, the benchmarking be the key of trying to, lay out the fundamentals of fair remuneration or the principles on fair remuneration. I think presently we have so many global payroll modules in the market which can help you achieve that. They can help you centralize all the information across various countries where your talent is located, put them in the same place, help you run analysis that can basically give you a view of what kind of skills are happening around your payroll, how compliant you are in terms of the various tax regulations that you need to deal with across the various countries. It can also help you provide a view of how can you create localized benefits for your people across various geographies, right? And of course, what these tools bring in is a very good experience for our people, because they ensure that your payroll data is absolutely accurate. There is no risk of errors. And they also enable people to be able to see all the information transparently, right? I think in all, it enhances the experience of the employee as well. And in turn, of course, helps in retention of the talent.
I very much agree with the earlier comments. Benchmark data is essential right now, and I think the benchmark data has gotten much, much better over the years. You can filter it in ways that I think are very, very important. And I've come to find that, the benchmark data can tell you anything that you want it to tell you. So if you don't filter it in the right ways, if you're not looking at geo, if you're not looking at level, if you're not looking at role, and if you're not looking at the right type of company, if you're pulling public company benchmark data for a private early stage startup, which we are, you're going to get very skewed data. So benchmark data, is something I very much rely on, but I also very much agree with Anna's comment about paper performance. I spend probably half of my time on something related to compensation, and a good portion of my time with executives is about compensation, and that's executives internally, but also our board, talking about a paper for performance philosophy. And if you have a benchmark range of a job paying $10 to $20, I don't expect everybody to fall at 15, right? I expect my stars to be at 20, and I expect my lower performers to be at 10. And I think that really is the right incentive to make sure that people are giving it their all. And when they are giving it their all and getting better outcomes, they should be rewarded disproportionately in a good way.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's interesting. And I think later in the webinar, we're going to talk more about engaging employees with those kind of performance-based initiatives. So I'll leave that there for now, just to move on to the next question. But unless any of you guys have anything that you wanted to add, pay and compensation side. The next question that I had is, this is like so broad, but like, what does a strong company culture look like in 2025? Because obviously we have this hard stuff on that side, and then we also have the stuff, and there's so many studies showing engagement starts with like the sense of belonging and purpose and meaning. And yeah, I'd just love to hear from you all how this looks. So Priyanka, maybe we can start with you. Especially interested in talking about like from a global perspective, like in a global team, what does this look like? What's the role of flexibility? How can companies cater to both like remote and like in-house employees?
Sure. I think it's a very relevant topic, in terms of engaging and retaining talent. So if you're observing our workforce today, at least in the last 10 years, the workforce is constantly evolving. And in the last 8 to 10 years, there's a good mix of millennials coming in. And now that you see the Gen Zs are becoming part of the workforce, and I think they are pushing the organizations to rethink about the essentials of company culture. I believe, and this has been my observation, uh, the workforce of tomorrow with more Gen Zs and millennials in the mix would be someone who basically appreciates a lot of flexibility, a lot of trust in the organization, and an organization that values them. So that not only believes in providing them sustainable support in terms of development or growth for with respect to their responsibilities and roles alone, but also focuses on their all-rounded wellness. So I think those are things that are becoming more and more important. And as we talk about global workforce, I think both remote and hybrid kind of setups that are becoming more and more relevant now are a way in which these workforces are becoming more adaptable to company culture. Right, it's making the company culture more and more fluid. So what I really put it, there are say four non-negotiables to company culture today. I think the first one being transparency, and how you achieve that is basically by being flawless at your communication. So imagine an organization which is working remotely. If you want to be absolutely sure that everybody is together and they're aligned to your vision, communicate more and more. The more you communicate, the lesser that is, right? So that's the best way to keep people together, to keep people engaged with your vision and aligned to what you want to achieve. The second one, as I spoke about, is absolute trust and autonomy. We believe that we are hiring the best people, right? So ensure that you're allowing them to deliver their best. Set the right expectations, set the right ecosystem for them to, be able to give their best, and believe in them and trust with them. I think autonomy is one thing that the workforce of tomorrow will highly appreciate. The next one, I believe, is compassion and respect. Being very well aware that the individual who is working for you as part of your organization is also a whole person beyond this organization. So being empathetic towards that part of your employee's life, I think, is also critical, and is something that people see as a very valuable aspect of being part of an organization. And lastly, as I spoke about, all-rounded wellness, right? Something that not only talks about physical wellness, but also talks about mental wellness, emotional wellness, and all of that. So I believe a very different approach to any culture. Uh, I think the organizations are already evolving on that path, and we are somewhere there. But I think that's the kind of change that our workforce is going to push us towards in the coming years. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would just add that I'm a big believer in sort of the official definition, if you will, of engagement, right? And I think there's been so much research over the past, many years, but even more recently, I think some of the work that Culture Amp has done to help us really understand, like, what does engagement actually mean, and the answer is really about the meaning that people are finding in their work and the importance that they find, and do they feel like they're actually contributing in a way that is of value, and sort of moves us away from this kind of the happiness factor. I remember, like, once being at a company where we would ask a question like, do you have a best friend at work? And although that's a lovely and sweet question, I don't know that the data would actually say that that necessarily makes you engaged or not. Maybe it does, who knows, right? But increasingly, I've become a big believer in, the more that you can actually really understand the root cause drivers of what is giving someone meaning, now you're at it. Now you're at the hook. And I think once people feel that deep connection of like, wow, I'm waking up every day and I'm going to a place where we're building something great and where we're trying to change the world and where we're doing something that no one's ever done before and where I'm a part of that, you know, if you can get your employees feeling that level of intrinsic connection, I find all the other stuff starts to just naturally, you know, do they have my favorite flavor of iced tea in the fridge today? You know, all these other things that can often be, I think, superficial replacements for engagement don't really matter either way once people feel like, oh, this is the place for me. Now, of course, the key is to get to that place. You have to have so much working for you culturally, right? You have to have a clear vision. You have to have a leadership team that's really committed. You have to have a culture of feedback. You have to have a culture of people being seen and understood and recognized for their work. And probably most importantly, in my opinion, you have to have a culture where people feel like they're growing in their career. And I think, you know, that means very different things for different people. You can't one size fits all that. But once you get at those intrinsic factors, then, you know, the foosball table or not, and the iced tea or not, and even things like commute and pay in some cases, you know, they become actually less things that people wake up and worry about all day if they're going to work saying, oh my gosh, this is a place where I'm making a difference. So I really fundamentally believe in that sort of deep meaning metric and trying to get to the root causes behind it, good or bad.
Nice, thank you.
And I think so much of that resonated with me because I'm always telling my team, you know, don't look at the symptoms. The symptoms are just symptoms. Let's like try and peel back the onion layers, look at the root causes. And I think the only thing I will add to that, you know, you both said it so well, but I think it's your leadership team and how are your leaders? Are they well equipped to be culture carriers? You know, leaders cast such a big shadow, and I think our role is to help them to ensure that they are communicating the vision, they're you know, making asynchronous work, they're doing the recognition, they're doing all of these symptomatic things that ultimately lead to you know, to the employees feeling really engaged. So I think, you know, developing your managers in that is probably the key thing for me, and if you don't get that right, I feel like the rest can really crumble as well. So
Nice, thank you. Yeah. Do any of you have thoughts on like the onboarding process? Because I know that's like a big one for like instilling that culture early on, especially with remote teams. Like, is there anything any of you would want to add there?
Look, I mean, you know, I don't want to sort of toot our own horn, but we obviously are a HCM. We have really automated onboarding. We've built that internally. We've got so much content that we are able to use asynchronously. And I think that's really important for that consistent experience, despite, you know, the time zone differences and the globe. And I think that for us has made a really huge difference of ensuring that everyone is going through that consistent experience and getting all those culture cues really early on, you know, seeing the values, seeing the leadership team, getting all of those, I guess, you know, super, you know, not so obvious things, but, and, you know, sometimes they are obvious, but really getting them bedded down really early on. That's been really important for us.
Nice, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the things that was mentioned in that past section is the upskilling, reskilling kind of side. Like that's obviously a big performance driver and a big engagement driver if people feel like they've got a clear future. And it's just, I'm just wondering, like, how can companies make clear their kind of internal mobility, even early on or as people progress, just encouraging people to take ownership of their learning, I guess, and development. So Anna, Meyer, I'll start with you this time.
You know, this is one of the things I actually really miss about a big company. You know, the first probably 15 years of my career I was in really big companies, and the last 10 years I've been in very small companies. And this is one of the things that I think is very different, and to your point, puts so much more burden on the employee. Because in bigger organizations where mobility is really prioritized, and I worked in companies where it was very much prioritized at GE, at Intuit, you know, our whole philosophy in many regards was about internal talent, and how do you identify internal talent and put them on paths that will serve the business, but that will also serve them personally. And to be honest, in those environments, oftentimes the company is way ahead of the employee. They've already, in HR, we would be spotting the people that were our next gen leaders, and we would proactively be pointing them toward where we wanted them to go, and we'd have logic for that. And of course, they would have a voice in that, but they had so much support from the company, sort of, moving them through the system. In smaller companies, it's just a very different world, right? And the starting spot is very different because there's a lot less roles. I work in a company today with 250 people total globally. And so it's very different from a 10,000 person company or a 300,000 person company in GE. And in those environments, you really need employees to kind of be more vocal and more clear. And you also need them to be more patient, because oftentimes what someone's aspirations are, I might not have a role for them in that immediately, but I can still have that conversation with them and talk to them about how we can get them there. In other cases, though, I've found that when employees raise their hand about something they want, we can get creative and figure out, okay, could we do some kind of hybrid role? Could we do a rotation? Could we teach you these skills on a project base? So I do think the more that employees can just voice what they're interested in, then the burden becomes on the HR team. But I also agree with Anna, it becomes on the managers. When they hear that, they can't just say, oh, we don't have that job, so sorry. If it's a lot like raising kids. If your kid comes to you and says, Mom, I really love basketball, and my answer is, oh, sorry, the school doesn't have a league, I guess you'll have to pick a different sport. That's a really bad answer. And I think that's very analogous for companies. If somebody comes to me and says that they want to do something that I don't have a job for them right away, and I say, oh, sorry, we don't have that, I guess you'll have to go somewhere else. That's a really disappointing answer. Instead, if I say, well, I don't know, let's go to Walmart and pick up a ball and go hang out in the courts down the street and play some one-on-one. Can you tell that it's NCAA in the United States tonight? It's the college championship of the basketball game. And so we'll know the winner here in like 3 minutes. So basketball is in all of our minds. My point just being that, oftentimes the company can't always serve up the exact thing that someone wants in the moment, but there's lots of ways to still give them the experience. And I think that it takes a lot more work on the company's part, and it takes a lot more work on the employee's part.
That makes sense. So then how do you encourage people or make people know that they can come to you with those desires and expectations? Does that start really early on, or how does that look?
Yeah, it's an area I would love to be better in. I would love to hear Anna's thoughts on this, right? Because I do think it also comes back to that frontline manager. Most employees are not going to call my CEO and say, hey, CEO, I would like to talk to you about my career aspirations. But they will give their managers hints. And sometimes those hints are very direct, but more often they're more subtle and they're more testing the system. And if the manager is just so busy worried about their to-do list or their project that they need to get done for next week, they're going to miss those cues, and they're not going to invest in that talent in the way that they need to be. On the flip side, if they're really listening closely to what someone wants and why, then they're going to pull on that thread, and they're going to ask more questions, and they're going to say, what is it about basketball that you like better than cricket? And how can I help you actually, uncover the purpose behind that? And I think most managers, at least that I've seen, especially in smaller companies, they don't always feel comfortable with that conversation, right? It feels a little too esoteric. It feels a little too far away from the to-do list. And I think that really gets at, if you can teach managers to be comfortable with those conversations, bullseye. I would say, I still work with managers on more basic things like, can you give them feedback on their current project? Or can you, can you make a pay for performance decision? I'm having a very hard time with that word tonight. So yeah, it's a real art. It takes a lot of time, and I find it really is a seasoned leader usually who can actually sort of spot those conversations and move them forward.
Can I add to that, Anna? I think I love a sporting analogy, and in one of the businesses I worked in, we had one of our core values was play the ball, and the intention was that we wanted people to catch the ball and play the ball and really take initiative. And so I think, to answer Beth's question earlier, how do we instill that? I guess it's a lot of things, but I think one of them is that continuous feedback culture and really turning performance conversations in not just to how did I do, but how can I actually grow? And some businesses will have really clear competency matrices and skills taxonomies that will then, show where they can go into career pathing. In some businesses, well, there are those, but you don't necessarily have the roles to go into those. So I think, it's really, really important to make the managers really comfortable with having those conversations, and then together exploring, okay, so what are the critical experiences that we can find to fulfill some of the gaps until a role becomes available. I think the other piece for us is just ensuring that people are really comfortable with ambiguity, and that, and working in the grey. So there might not be a really, really clear path into what the next role will be, whether it's it's in promotion or whether it's a sideways move into a different area. But I think it's getting people really comfortable to work in the grey. I think I read somewhere that, 60% of the skills that we have today are going to be irrelevant with the entrance of AI and tech into the market. So, how do we ensure that we're setting people up to really become quite comfortable in the grey, to be able to take the skills that they have to apply them in different ways. And I think it's almost like, again, peeling back onion layers, working with the core, as opposed to, the more traditional, here is a career path and this is where you're going to go. Easier said than done, and equipping managers with the skills to have those conversations, I think, is also a really big challenge. But we're still figuring out and working through. But me personally, I partner really closely with our leaders and make sure that I'm coaching them in the battle when people are feeling, a little bit lost as well.
Thank you. Yeah. What's your guys' take on the skills-based hiring, skills-based organizational type of narrative? Because I know there's a bit of there's two sides to the story, right? Do you feel like companies should be moving more towards a skills-based approach?
I absolutely do. I think one of the books I read that resonated really well with this was The Talent Code. And so, it basically said that no one is born with, a particular level of ability. And I think it's kind of the same thing, right? You can teach lots of things, and I think you can teach the specific things, those specific technical skills or role-specific skills. We actually had someone that went into a sales role that came from a nursing background. And the reason that she's really, really successful is because she's got really strong relationship management. She knows how to talk to people. She has high EQ. She reads social cues really well. She's very dedicated and diligent. So, I think that's probably a real life example of someone that is utilizing skills that are completely in a different sector and then transitioning and learning on the role. So, yeah, so I'm a massive advocate, and I think that companies that don't, companies that are a little bit more traditional or rigid, will actually miss out on such great talent in the future, because I think it will become the norm.
I think completely agree with Anna there. And taking this point back to the upskilling and reskilling, I think the way organizations are also looking at, and people are being more aware about, the fact that various technical skills can be learned on the job. So when we look at internal mobility as well, people themselves are becoming more and more vocal in terms of trying various opportunities within the organization, acquiring as many different skills as they can try within the same organization. It provides them the air cover, because you're part of that ecosystem, you're familiar with it, and at the same time you're able to add something more to yourself in terms of skills and capabilities. So I think that's a very interesting mix. And I also completely agree that skill-based hiring, I think, is the future of how we need to look at organizations and building the right capabilities, or gathering the right capabilities within the organization. Yeah.
Okay, amazing. I think we can maybe explore a little more the side of the performance reviews. Like, there's the upskilling, reskilling, but then the actual performance reviews themselves, how do any of you have thoughts on how they can be conducted in a way that is engaging and motivational for employees?
Yeah, I have a strong opinion on this topic, and it's also one of the things that I find really difficult to teach managers. I believe employees really want to kind of hear the story of them. It's funny, I got a cold call today from some company that ghostwrites your book, and of course their advertising was all right about, hey, Anna Meyer, we'll write the story of Anna Meyer and we'll publish it for you. And normally I would have just hit delete, but I actually sent them a message. And I said, can you tell me more about your company and what you do? Because I thought about it. They had me at the hook of, hey, what's the story of Anna Meyer? We all want to be the star in our own story. We all want other people to have watched our story and to pay attention to our story. So when a manager is sitting down and giving feedback to an employee, if they saw them, if they really watched the movie of them for 6 months, a year, 3 months, whatever the time period is, and they can play back, hey, you did this amazing thing, and then you struggled a little bit over here, and you got this wonderful quality, but you're lacking a little bit over there. I find employees are just so eager for that conversation, and they can also receive the feedback that's not so positive much better when they feel like, wow, you really watched my movie. You knew what I did this year. You knew why it mattered or why it didn't. In many cases, I have employees in those scenarios say, wow, like, yeah, I did kind of screw up on that thing, and I didn't know if you noticed, but you did. And they actually almost feel grateful that we were paying that much attention to them. So, my biggest advice to managers when they're writing a performance review is, yes, that will be the document. And I do think the document should be thorough, but I think the document should be simple. There's nothing I hate more than over-architected performance reviews, because at the end of the day, they should really answer very simple questions. What did you accomplish? Where are your greatest strengths? Where did you struggle? Why did you struggle? And to the earlier conversation, where are you headed in your career and how can we help you get there? If you can answer those questions, you've done a great performance review. And yes, at the end of that, there's some version of a rating, and there's some version of when is there a promotion coming, and when is there a pay decision tied to that. But getting the story right, I think, is the hard part. And I think this is where managers just have to really pay attention and notice their people, and have a process for how they capture those moments and then can play those moments back.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I think, the cadence of the performance review, whether it's annual, biannual, quarterly, different things work differently for businesses, whether you have ratings or no ratings. I think there are so many different ways to tackle it. But I think in order for any of those versions to be successful, what I've found in my experience is that having a feedback culture where you're having regular, always-on conversations with your people, recognizing those small wins and giving live feedback, calling it out in the moment, having those conversations. So when it does come to the quarterly, biannual, or annual performance review time, there are no surprises. And that is just really a conversation about, okay, where to from here holistically, rather than specifically about, a whole series of things. And I think I really like the movie analogy. But I'll add to that. But maybe it's like it's a weekly episode. So
Better.
Yeah, right. Because you want to constantly be like, okay, you saw my week, and I think that's what staying really. I guess giving leaders permission and ensuring that they are staying really close to their teams and investing the time. And I think this is particularly hard for middle managers because they tend to need to manage up, and then they also have things that they need to do and they need to manage down. And I think really supporting them to get that right level so that they're investing in the coaching with their teams, as well as doing the doing. And I think that's really, really important part as well is how do we strike that balance for to support the managers.
Yeah,
Love the weekly episode. Love that. That's great.
Yeah, I think completely agree with both the analogies that Anna has shared. And I think startups, the new age organizations, I think find it a little bit more struggling. As Anna Meyer mentioned, the responsibility lies predominantly on the managers, to make those performance review conversations more engaging, more motivating. And you see in the startup environment, there are a lot of new managers in the ecosystem, right? When you have the experienced managers in the bigger organizations, they kind of have an understanding of how do you, go through that narrative, or how do you build that narrative for your employees. But that's the kind of constant effort that we need to put in new age startups or in new age organizations where you have a lot of new managers that are coming into, these roles. How do you help them? How do you enable them to create those stories or those narratives come out of that shelf of doing your day-to-day tasks and looking at your team from a bird's eye view and looking at what's working well and what's not working well, right? So I think that's a very important balance for us to strike as an organization, something that we can invest on.
Nice. Thank you, everyone. That was really interesting. I think that the last section we have planned right now is spotting disengagement. Actually, I'll start with like the controversial question that do you guys think that like remote global teams are more prone to disengagement in the first place? And then we can jump into kind of like the spotting and fixing side.
I think there is a common belief that remote teams are prone to disengagement. But I think that the real challenge is visibility. And, this is what I think, particularly with hybrid teams, I think when it's all remote or all in office, it's obviously a different story. But I think with hybrid, there is definitely that visibility challenge. And I think that, long are the days where culture is made in the office and water cooler conversations. I think, it is made everywhere. It's made in people's homes now. And so I think the way in which we look at cues for disengagement, it needs to also be different. We really, I think, the way in which we use tools, EMPS and other pulse surveys, etc. I think that's definitely a really big player. I think how leaders are looking for those cues as well, looking at the lagging indicators, not just those obvious EMPS scores dropping. Whether it's one thing that, for example, for us is looking at shout outs and kudos. Teams that are highly engaged, for example, will be really, really involved in giving shout outs and celebrating wins, etc. I think that's one thing that's really, really important to look at is, are those things, when you look at all of your online forums, whether it's Slack, your HCM or whatever platforms you use, are they starting to, to get less? Is there data that you can run to look at, those shout outs and how much people are high-fiving each other, not just in the office, but online as well. So I think it's that visibility piece. How do we gain more visibility to see whether there is disengagement? I also feel like the definition of what engagement is has changed. So, I think getting teams together in the way that we used to for team events, etc., in the office is probably not the way in which, engagement is demonstrated. So, what are the other ways in which our team are showing up every day and finding what that is for your business? What are the unique cues for your business, and watching if they are changing over time as well. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but
yeah, no, that was a really nice answer. I'd love to know more about, actually, from all of you, like the definition of engagements changing. That's like an interesting angle. To Anna, Meyer, or Priyanka, do either of you have thoughts about that too?
For me, I think it's what I said before of like, I've always sort of had this belief that the real engagement is the intrinsic value, right? And so even when we were more in office, I still had that fundamental belief, right? And again, there's a bunch of in-office stuff. I mean, there was a period here in Silicon Valley where it was just all about the snacks and the drinks and the outings and the events and the parties and, how much money could one company, it was like, that was the culture, right? And I think we absolutely learned, right? There are plenty of companies that completely went bust in that time, and plenty of companies that just overspent on all of that stuff, and they didn't have their employees' hearts. They just had stuff. It's kind of like how I feel when I overshop on a Saturday, right? Like I hit the buy now button too many times. I'm like, I didn't really need all of that stuff, right? At the moment, I thought that was going to make me happy. And then you're like, I don't think I needed all that. I probably needed to go for a walk, or I probably needed to go have a healthy lunch, right? And so I do think that for me, that definition of engagement has always been about the intrinsic value. I think what is changing, and Anna made a good point here, is everything's been normalized now since COVID around that, right? What it used to be is that, yes, you could spot all those things more easily because you were in office and you could pick up on it directly. Now the global world is much more even this way, because even if we're in the same city, we're probably not all seeing each other in the office on a regular basis, right? So everything's gotten normalized to a remote world. I do think in a remote world, it is harder to pick up on those cues. You know, we're doing that through a screen, and there's still tons of research that would support that screen does not give us a full enough experience to always know, you know, how somebody is feeling or not. But, you know, for me, it really just comes back down to, do people really feel like they're doing meaningful work? And I do think that can be harder sometimes to instill in people when you're not seeing them, touching them, you know, in day-to-day interaction with them, for sure.
I think I want to talk about a little bit on the role that managers and leadership play in ensuring engagement within the organization. While the responsibility rests on them even when it's a hybrid setup or an office setup, but I think it becomes more and more critical when it becomes remote, because you experience the organization in a very different way if you're working remotely from your homes, right? Imagine you are on a 2-hour hike in a group, and all of a sudden after 1 hour your leader goes missing. There is no communication in terms of where you want to go next, what you are going to do next. You're going to feel lost, right? So I think that communication is very, very important to ensure that your people are feeling engaged, especially in the remote organization. And that's where I think the leadership has to play a very important role, a very strong leadership in terms of how well can they get their people together, aligned in what they are thinking and how they are trying to approach in their vision. I think that's very important. And secondly, the managers. I think especially in a remote setup, your manager is the face of the organization for you, right? The way they operate, the way they make their decisions is exactly how you would perceive the organization is. So I think it is very important as the managers to be enabled in the right way, for them to display the values of the organization in the right way, to make sure that people feel connected, and at the same time they are able to engage the talent, as we spoke about earlier as well. The role of managers in ensuring the conversations are more motivating, more engaged in terms of their performance. Also, apart from the formal connections, the informal connections, I think the managers play a very vital role in being able to achieve that balance for us, especially in the remote setups.
Can I think, yeah, we did speak a little bit about leaders and the role of managers to, to have those performance conversations, to be the coach, feedback, etc. I think probably one thing, and, I remember when I left my last role, some people asked me, what's the one piece of advice that you can give me? And I said, to be honest, the one piece of advice is be the change you seek. And I think it's instilling in each individual that it's, as much as it is the leader's responsibility to gauge cues and watch for, to ensure that their team is engaged. I think it's also embedding a culture where everyone feels like they are also the champions of the culture. They are the ones that are really taking ownership and control of, driving their own destiny. I think that's becoming more and more difficult since COVID, and there has been a lot of, that agreement between the employer and the employee has changed, and there's this big demand of, these are all my wants, and, this is, if I don't get them, I might leave. There's definitely that turn to. But I feel like, again, to Anna's point earlier, if you've got that connection to the vision and the mission and you really build that strong bond, you can actually then instill people to take ownership of the culture and to encourage each other. So, that they're also looking out for each other, looking out for cues, feeding information in every direction about what's going on. And people being proactive. Most of my team are abroad. We've got obviously our APJ team here, and I have to be really, really proactive to ensure I'm building relationships and setting up time with people and making sure that I know who I need to know in the business to get things done, to get involved in things. So I think that proactivity is also really, really crucial, and it's about training for that, hiring for that, embedding that in our ethos as a business as well.
Nice, thank you so much. Yeah, that was a really interesting point. And then I guess on the other side, like if you do spot the disengagement, what are the kind of initiatives that work to re-engage, and don't know if you have any experience in that?
I think once people are disengaged, it's hard to get them back, right? And I think the art of it, of course, is like what's the point at which you've lost them? And then anything you say or do, they've already emotionally disconnected, and therefore, it's going to be really a difficult challenge. But there are always plenty of signs before that moment of disengagement. And that moment of disengagement from the point they might resign or, become a poor performer or whatever might happen can sometimes be very long, right? You might have somebody sitting in a role that's actively looking and checked out and not really trying anymore, because in their mind they're done, and now they're taking up a very valuable space in the organization, and that's a terrible spot to be in. We would all agree with that, right? So I think the key is really what can you notice before that moment of disengagement where they are still engaged, but things are starting to slip, right? And by slip, I don't necessarily mean performance, although it could be that. Maybe they normally come into, they start their day normally at 8 a.m. and you notice that they're starting a little bit later. Maybe in meetings, they're a little bit more quiet than they used to be. Maybe they're more frustrated with their coworkers and they're expressing that more to you. Maybe they're casually dropping conversations about their compensation in ways that they weren't before. All of those are little hints. Maybe they used to be really vocal about things that made them unhappy, and now all of a sudden they're just nodding their head and they're agreeing, right? And the myriad of subtle cues that we as human beings can send off, right? And I think the biggest thing is when you notice a pattern change, right? Invariably, anybody that is starting to get disengaged, their pattern will change in whatever way. And I think, back to it's very rare, I think, in business anymore, probably ever, but certainly in these times, for managers to just be sitting around saying, oh, I have nothing else to do today but pay attention to the patterns of my employees, right? Managers are so mired in their own work, and oftentimes they have their own IC work in addition to their manager work. I don't fault our managers at all. They have so much on their plate. And as you all well know, right, there's so much research right now about the manager being really the breaking point where a lot of this comes down. And I think that is because they're expected to do so much more than quote unquote manage. But if we can all kind of get back to our roots as managers to say, okay, I'm responsible for humans, and my humans are sending me different signals than they were sending to me before. How am I going to now go in and diagnose that? Then I think you often can catch it before they're quote unquote disengaged.
Nice. Thank you so much.
And I think that's a really good point. And, I think the other point is deciphering whether is it an individual that is disengaged because of broader things in the business, or is it their own journey and experience? And I think that's where, obviously the different measures and, the EMPS and engagement surveys can come into play. And, if you are able to catch it early and start seeing a pattern across the board, I think what's really important for me, it's transparency and radical candor, having those opportunities to open up the conversation, to acknowledge that there is something that isn't great, that was great, that used to be great, that now is declining, and really understanding what's going on. So using whatever indicators that you have to then open up conversations, and then I think be honest about what you can and cannot, what change you can impact and what change you cannot impact. The business might not be in a position to, to have programs of work that, that are highly costly, and they're just not in a position to do that. So I think it's being honest about what you can impact and what you can't. And ultimately, if you do have actions that you are committing to, actually do them. And if you cannot do them for any reason, if you need to pivot away from them, again, being transparent about communication and being really open. I think if you treat people as adults and explain to them that sometimes there are certain things that we cannot do as a business for whatever reason, I think people will understand, and I think that they'll actually be really value the honesty and the transparency. So,
nice, thank you so much. So the last section of the webinar, I'd kind of like to explore the impact of culture. So how can you ensure engagement across different cultures, like in a global team? And any of you feel free to start.
We are a global business, and so I think there's a couple of things that we do. One of them is, as part of onboarding and throughout the employee journey, we have cultural training, so cultural awareness training, and really opening everyone's, I guess, minds and empathy towards how different people from different cultures communicate and relate to each other. So I think that's definitely one for us. I think it's bringing people together on a shared set of values and making sure that those values, I guess, are communicated across the board often and quite intentionally, so that we are all, we're all using those values as that core anchor. I think that's really, really important for us. And other than that, I think it's getting asynchronous work right as well. Ensuring that there is clarity in terms of how we're using tools, how we're working together, what are the progress dates, so I think it's that communication and those types of commitments that we make to each other, even though we are, on all the different sides of the globe and in different time zones.
Completely agree here with Anna. I think being able to spread that awareness with our people, amongst the people around various cultural dynamics that they will be dealing with in the organization, I think is very, very important. I think one of the things that we at Multiplier try to do is celebrate those differences, right? So culturally, the different holidays, maybe the different celebrations that might come around the year, we try to recognize them and celebrate them, so that of course helps people feel valued across the various geographies. I think that's something that adds to the happiness quotient of our people.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I think the more that you can keep the kind of constant cultural education that's always happening, we'll never be done understanding each other's cultures. And the more you can keep that just like this fun curiosity led experiment as opposed to judgment, right? Like I think, I'm really proud of where the culture that I work in right now. I feel like anytime we don't understand something about the other culture, our default perspective is probably like, oh, explain to me how that works. Most of my employees are in India. I've done business in India many times, so it's not new for me, but I still learn something every single day about how to do business in India. And if I just approach it with like, oh, that's new for me, explain it to me, I will never have someone say, oh my gosh, how did you not know that about India, Anna? Like, haven't you done business in India before? I don't feel that judgment. And at the same time, I think on the flip side, the moment you start to, oh, well, why did you have that day off as a holiday? Or why did we celebrate that? Or why do you say it that way? Or, why do you communicate this way, to the earlier point? If there's just a subtle tone of that, of course, no one's going to say that directly, then people start to that's when the sensitivity starts to build in, and then the judgment starts to build in, and then the us and them starts to build in. So the more that it can just be sort of this interesting, fun experiment. I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago. I was speaking with someone that was Indian, although he's now in Canada. And I said, oh yeah, well we were at Oktoberfest. And I said, well, it's the knickers that they're wearing. And he kept looking at me and I said, yeah, like, those are very traditional German knickers. And I thought he didn't know what knickers were. And I said it a couple of times. And then he said, Anna, do you know that in India knickers are underwear? You're not talking about him being in his underwear, are you? I said, no. And we just had such a great laugh over it, right? Like, as opposed to any sort of judgment of like, well, why didn't you know this term? Or why are you saying it that way? It's literally just like him saying, well, knickers for me means this and it means that for you. And just like leaning into that. I had someone apologize to me today because they said something that they thought might be offensive to North American culture. And it wasn't, but even if it had been, my response was like, that's okay. I know culturally for you, that would be something that would be very normal, right? And so the more that we can just like, the fact that he was sensitive enough to apologize when he hadn't offended me, but he took a moment to think, I don't know if Americans would say it that way. I might have offended her. I'm going to say something about it. And then me to say, it's totally cool. Every one of those moments, you're just learning, you're interacting in a different way. And I think this is so much of the fun, I think, of doing business globally. Like, what a bore just all doing it in our one country, right? Like, I look back on jobs that I've had that were very US based, and they're far less fun than these jobs that are more global. But it is harder because you're constantly doing that dance. The last thing I will just say on this is I also think the strain that it puts on everybody. We started this call today, right, talking about the time zones. I'll hang up with you all and I'll start my India calls for the night. I'll be on calls for another 2.5 hours. I still had a normal work day here in the US, right? I do think that is also a barrier that sometimes we forget, back to the engagement factor. people sometimes are working around the clock in the middle of the night, just trying to juggle all the demands. And I think we have to be very sensitive to, we often think of culture as the ways we communicate and the things that are different or similar to us. I think we also have to recognize that global workforces mean global time zones and a lot of strain on family and sleep and health and all sorts of burden that this puts on people that isn't ideal. And there's no magic way around that. But I think that's also something that as global HR leaders, we have to be very aware of that, the strain that puts on people.
I think completely a very good point there in terms of the different time zones that come into picture when we are working globally with various teams, and of course very important for organizations to be cognizant that we are not making people stretch beyond certain comfortable time for their regions or geographies. But also I think there is an opportunity there for the organizations to craft their deliverables accordingly, because you have people scattered in different time zones. You can actually utilize that to your benefit to model your service delivery functions accordingly, how you can cater respective geographies with a very localized experience, and at the same time providing them a very global view of you as an organization, right? So I think that is a very good opportunity that different cultures and the global workforce brings for us.
I think the only thing I'll say, and Anna, I laughed when you said knickers because it means the same thing in Australia. And I learned something today because I didn't know that that's not what it meant internationally, because of course that's what it should mean. And I think psychological safety is a really, really important one here too. I think, whether it's being able to, it's just having that culture where you are able to say, hey, that time is a really, really bad time for me. And can you record the conversation, or can you, do a little bit of extra work to accommodate me so I can send my thoughts beforehand if there's particular topics that are going to be covered off. And, allowing those, mistakes to happen without judgment and really embedding that in the culture, I think is really, really important, particularly because, no one ever intends anything, anyway, badly. But I think it's creating that culture where you can have those candid, open conversations and, ask questions and, be able to have a bit of a laugh about it too, right? So I think that's, that's really important for us.
Nice. And what does creating that psychological safety look like? Like, I guess what part of that falls on HR and what part of that falls on leadership, as we've been exploring?
Look, I think like with many of these things, for me, HR's role is to, I think almost, set some of the structures and frameworks and make the tools available and be there to coach and be a sounding board. And then it's really up to the leaders to deliver and bring those things to life and be open to the feedback when they're not bringing it to life. And really, I think having that relationship between P&C or HR and the leadership team. I think for us, we can have a bird's eye view over the entire organization and look at, what is happening across teams and bring that together for the leaders as well, because they might not have that lens. So I think it's setting the foundations and then the leaders to enact, but then also bringing it back, because we've got greater visibility or we should have greater visibility. And so I think it's those two things that really can bring the right foundations for psych safety in a business.
Nice. Any final thoughts from you, Anna, Matt, or Priyanka?
I think on this global topic for me, and not to make it a political discussion, right? But I do think that what we're seeing happen in the U.S. right now is very different than any other presidency we've had ever, right? Probably. And so set aside your political views, right? This is going to be a very, very unusual time for the United States. And we're seeing that that's going to have an impact on the world. And I think if you already add into that the many, many tensions all around the world that we're well aware of, right? I think the world is becoming a little less sensitive every day, right? We're getting all a little bit more, I think, affected by some of these these debates, these opinions, these strong points of view that are being put out and enacted in a very specific way. To think that that will not have an impact on business is naive, in my opinion. And I think, I do believe in the separation of church and state, if you will, right? I do believe in the separation of sort of those political conversations from the workplace, but I don't believe in the kind of, you can't put a wall between those two things. And so I do think we'll have to watch increasingly as different populations have different views. And by population, it could mean geopopulation, it could mean religious population, it could mean political affiliation, right? Those tensions are going to continue to rise. And as an American, right, I don't see that changing. I don't think anytime soon, we'll just change our mind about the tariffs thing. I think that this is going to be a new way of operating that we haven't seen in a very long time. What that means for all of us in terms of the dynamics, I don't know. I just know it will mean something different and new. And I think all the more reason that we're going to have to be sensitive to that and sensitive to the fact that people are going to be feeling a lot of things at work every day. And I don't think we should just ignore that. But I also think we've got to keep the boundaries. And that's a really hard line, right? How do you have a boundary around it without opening up a conversation that is not appropriate to have? And on the flip side, how do you not just turn your eye away from it and act like it's not happening? That will get interesting, I think.
Yeah, I think very fair point. And I think something similar that we kind of experienced in Multiplier at some point of time, we had, because you have so many tools where you collaborate together, right? There were conversations that probably started which were not favoring to a certain set of people, right? And then the role of HR, right? We had to step in and we had to help them understand that, we need to make sure that our conversations are balanced, our conversation or our views are balanced in terms of these discussions. And we can probably focus more in terms of topics that are more driven towards collaborative and constructive views rather than, opposing thoughts coming into the play. So I think, that's a very difficult balance for us to achieve. But I think as HR leaders or as organizations, that's the journey that's set for us to uncover in the future.
Yeah, okay, I'm really glad you guys raised that point. I think that's a really good one. I'm gonna have to stop us there because we are nearing the end of the webinar. But thank you all so much for speaking. I really appreciate your contributions, and thank you everyone for joining. If you're interested in rewatching, we will be emailing a link of the webinar. But yeah, thank you so much for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.